For most of my life, I believed quiet meant being strong. I believed love meant obedience. And I believed that asking questions was something you simply didn't do. From the outside, everything looked fine. Faith, family, structurals. But inside, I was slowly disappearing. I didn't walk away loudly. I didn't explain myself. I just stopped pretending. This isn't a story about rebellion. It's a story about healing, about boundaries, about choosing peace, even when it means silence. And once you understand why I stepped back, you'll never see my story the same way again. For a long time, I believed silence meant strength. I believed obedience meant love. I believed that staying quiet was the right thing to do, even when my heart felt heavy. I grew up learning how to listen before I ever learned how to speak. I learned how to help, how to agree, how to smile, and how to keep things together. From the outside, everything looked peaceful, structured, faithful, strong, and for a long time, I thought it was. I didn't question the rhythm of my life. Every day followed a pattern, and that pattern felt safe. When you're raised inside certainty, you don't realize how much of yourself you've tucked away just to keep everything calm. I learned early that being good meant being quiet. It meant putting everyone else first. It meant believing that my needs would somehow sort themselves out later. Later never came. As I grew older, life began asking me questions I didn't know how to answer. Questions about who I was outside of expectations. Questions about what I felt when no one was watching. Questions about why I felt anxious even when I was doing everything right. I didn't have the language for it back then. I just knew something inside me felt tired, not physically, emotionally. Tired of always being careful. Tired of always checking myself before speaking. Tired of believing that discomfort was something I simply had to accept. When I became a wife and later a mother, that quiet tiredness grew louder. I was responsible for little lives now. I was shaping an environment, a home, a future. And suddenly, the questions felt heavier because they were no longer just about me. I began noticing how often I apologized for things that weren't wrong. How often I said yes when I wanted to say no. How often I ignored my own limits because I didn't want to disappoint anyone. That's when I realized something important. I didn't know where my boundaries were. No one had ever taught me how to draw them. I had been taught how to endure, not how to protect myself. At first, the idea of boundaries felt uncomfortable, even selfish. I worried that stepping back meant I was failing, that choosing space meant I was rejecting the people I loved. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Love doesn't disappear just because distance grows. Sometimes distance is what keeps love from breaking. I didn't wake up one day and decide to change everything. It happened slowly, quietly, one small realization at a time, one moment of honesty with myself, one step toward breathing easier. And the more I listened to that inner voice, the more I understood that healing doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes healing looks like learning to rest. Sometimes it looks like saying, I need time. And sometimes it looks like choosing silence, not because you're afraid to speak, but because you're finally listening to yourself. Situations. I remember the moment I realized something wasn't right, not in a dramatic way, not all at once. It was quiet. It was ordinary situations, and that's what made it impossible to ignore. I was doing everything I had always done, showing up, taking care of everyone, trying to keep peace. And yet inside situations, I felt overwhelmed in a way I couldn't explain. My body reacted before my mind did. Tight chest, racing thoughts, a constant feeling of being on edge. Situations, even when nothing was wrong. For a long time, I told myself it was normal, that everyone feels this way, that I just needed to pray harder, try harder. Situations, be better. I believed anxiety was a personal failure, not a signal. I didn't understand that my body was asking for help long before my words could. Situations. The idea of therapy scared me at first. It felt unfamiliar, uncomfortable. I worried it meant I didn't trust my faith enough. I worried it meant I was weak. Situations. I worried what people would think if they knew I needed help beyond what I'd always been taught. But eventually, situations, I reached a point where pretending was more exhausting than being honest. So I took a step I never thought I would take. Situations, I started talking to someone who listened without judgment, without expectations, without telling me who I was supposed to be. And in that space, situations, I heard things I had never allowed myself to hear before, that anxiety isn't a lack of faith, that boundaries aren't rebellion, that rest isn't laziness. Situations. I learned that fear and faith are not the same thing, even though they can sound similar when you grow up hearing them intertwined. Situations. I learned that being afraid of doing something wrong had shaped my choices more than I ever realized. For the first time, situations, I started separating what I believed from what I feared. That process was uncomfortable. It forced me to look at my past with new eyes, not to accuse, to blame. Situation, I began noticing how often obedience had been praised while emotions were quietly dismissed. How strength was defined as endurance, not honesty. Situations, I realized I had spent years strong in ways that hurt me. Therapy didn't give me all the answers. What it gave me was permission to feel, to question situations, to pause, to admit that some things I had normalized weren't healthy for me. And with that permission came grief. Situations, a grief for the younger version of myself who didn't know she could ask for help. Grief for the moments I swallowed my feelings to keep everything smooth. Situations, grief for the belief that my worth was tied to how well I followed rules. That grief wasn't loud. It was slow and heavy, but it was also healing, because grief situations, when you allow it, makes room for truth. And once I started telling myself the truth, I couldn't unlearn it. Situations, I began to see that choosing myself didn't mean abandoning my family. It meant learning how to show up without losing who I was through situations. It meant understanding that love doesn't require silence, and that peace doesn't come from pretending everything is fine. Situations, I wasn't walking away from where I came from, I was walking towards something healthier, and that journey was only just beginning. Situations, boundaries didn't happen in one conversation, it happened in layers, small choices, quiet decisions, situations, moments where I paused instead of reacting the way I always had. For most of my life, closeness meant constant availability. Being present meant never stepping back. Situations, love was measured by how much of yourself you were willing to give away without asking for anything in return. I didn't know there was another way to love. Situations. So when I began creating distance, even gentle distance, it felt unfamiliar, uncomfortable. I worried that space would be misunderstood. Situations, that silence would be taken as rejection, that choosing myself would look like disloyalty. But what I was learning slowly, situations, carefully, was that distance doesn't erase connection, it changes it. I wasn't gonna disappear. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was trying to breathe. Situations, that meant saying less. Other days, it meant not showing up the way I always had. And sometimes, situations, it meant sitting with the discomfort of knowing that people might not understand my choices and choosing peace anyway. That was one of the hardest lessons. Situations, I had spent so many years making sure everyone else felt comfortable that I didn't know how to sit with my own discomfort. Situations, I didn't know how to let others feel disappointed with it, rushing in to fix it. Boundaries taught me that I didn't have to explain everything to be honest. Situations, that I didn't have to justify every choice to be respectful, that love could remain even when expectations changed. There were moments when the distance felt heavy. Situations, when I questioned myself, I wondered if I was being selfish or ungrateful. Old beliefs don't disappear easily, they linger. Situations, they whisper doubts when you're trying to do something new. But each time I listened to that inner voice, the one I had ignored for so long, it grew steadier. Situations, I began to understand that my responsibility wasn't to preserve an image. It was to protect my well-being and the well-being of my children. Situations, and that required honesty. Even when that honesty was quiet, stepping back didn't mean I stopped caring. It meant I cared enough to stop pretending. Through situations, I still loved deeply, I still valued family, I still held gratitude for the life that shaped me. But I was learning how to love without losing myself in the process. Situations, that balance didn't come easily. It came with tears, with reflection, and with moments of doubt. But it also came with something I hadn't felt in a long time. Situations, relief. The kind of relief that comes when you finally allow yourself to live truthfully, even if that truth doesn't come with applause. Situations, and as I grew more comfortable with that truth, I realized something else. My healing wasn't just changing me, it was changing the way I understood love itself. Situations, motherhood changed everything for me in ways I didn't expect. It wasn't just the responsibility, it was the clarity. When I looked at my children, situations, I didn't just see who they were becoming, I saw who I had been, and that reflection was powerful. I began asking myself questions I had never asked before. Situations, what kind of emotional world did I want them to grow up in? What did I want them to learn about love, fear, and safety? Situations, what would they believe about themselves when they made mistakes? For a long time, I had believed that structure alone created security. that rules kept people safe. Situations that obedience prevented harm. But as a mother, I had to see that emotional safety matters just as much as physical safety. Sometimes more. Situations. I didn't want my children to grow up afraid of asking questions. I didn't want them to believe that silence was the price of belonging. Situations. I wanted them to know that their feelings mattered, even when those feelings were uncomfortable. That realization didn't make me angry at my past. Situations. It made me thoughtful. I could appreciate what I was given while still choosing something different for the next generation. Situations, gratitude and change can exist at the same time. I began to slow down, to listen more closely. Situations, to notice how my body reacted when I felt pressured to return to old patterns. Those reactions were telling me something. Situations, they were reminding me why I had stepped back in the first place. Protecting my children didn't mean isolating them. It meant being intentional. Situations, it meant creating a home where questions were welcomed, where mistakes weren't treated as failures, and where love didn't depend on performance. Situations, there were moments when this path felt lonely. Choosing differently often does. When you don't follow the familiar script, you lose the comfort of predictability. Situations, you have to trust your instincts instead of instructions. But every time I chose honesty over habit, I felt more grounded, more present, more myself. Situations, I wasn't trying to rewrite my story. I was trying to understand it so I could pass on something healthier. And in doing that, situations, I learned one of the most important lessons of all. Breaking cycles doesn't require anger. It requires awareness. Situations. For a long time, I didn't realize how closely fear and faith had been moving together in my life. They sounded similar, they felt similar. And because of that, situations, I couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. I believed faith meant certainty, that questioning meant weakness. Situations, that fear was something you prayed away instead of listened to. So when I felt anxious, I assumed I was failing spiritually, not emotionally overwhelmed. Situations. It took time for me to understand that fear can exist even in deeply faithful people. That faith doesn't require constant tension. Situations, and that peace isn't something you force. It's something you grow into. As I learned more about myself, situations, I started separating what I truly believed from what I had simply absorbed. Some beliefs felt grounding and life-giving. Others felt heavy, restrictive. Situations, and rooted in control rather than love. Letting go of those isn't easy. I worried that redefining my beliefs meant losing them entirely. Situations, I worried that stepping outside familiar ideas would leave me unanchored, but instead something unexpected happened. My faith became quieter, not smaller. Clearer. Situations, I stopped living in constant fear of getting things wrong. I stopped measuring my worth by how perfectly I followed expectations. And in that space, situations, I found something I had been missing for years: trust. Not just trust in what I believed, but trust in myself. Situations, I learned that listening to my conscience didn't mean turning my back on faith. It meant taking responsibility for it. Situations, it meant choosing belief intentionally instead of inheriting it unexamined. That shift brought relief, but it also brought grief. Situations, I had to acknowledge how much of my been shaped by fear-based thinking, how often I stayed quiet to avoid consequences. Situations, how rarely I allowed myself to feel uncertain without guilt. But grief didn't undo me, it freed me. Because once I accepted that fear was not a spiritual failure, situations, I could finally address it with compassion instead of shame. I could ask myself what I needed instead of what I was doing wrong. And slowly, situations, I began to feel more whole. Faith, I realized, doesn't grow stronger through silence alone. It grows through honesty, through curiosity, situations, through the courage to admit when something no longer fits. That realization didn't push me away from belief. Situations, it brought me closer to a version of it that felt safe. And with that safety came a deeper understanding of who I was becoming. Situations, as my life began to look different from the outside, I could feel the shift in how people talked about me. Some were supportive, some were confused. Situations, and some were critical in ways that felt deeply personal, even when they didn't know me at all. I had grown up where being understood mattered. Situations where explanations were expected, where silence could be misinterpreted as guilt or rebellion. So at first, the misunderstanding was hard to carry. Situations, people wanted answers, they wanted statements, they wanted clarity in neat, simple terms. But my life didn't feel neat or simple. Situations, I was still figuring things out myself. And the truth was, I didn't owe anyone a full explanation for a journey that was still unfolding. through situations, that realization took time to accept. Choosing not to explain didn't mean I had nothing to say. It meant I was learning to protect what was still tender. Situations. Some truths need space before they're ready to be shared. Some experiences lose their meaning when they're forced into sound bites. Situations. I watched assumptions form in places I couldn't control. I saw my silence turned into stories that weren't mine. Situations, and I had to make a choice. Correct every misunderstanding or let go of the need to be seen perfectly. Letting go was harder than I expected. Situations, I had spent years trying to be the version of myself that made everyone comfortable. Stepping away from that felt like stepping into uncertainty. Situations. But with each moment I chose quiet over defense, I felt stronger. I learned that every judgment deserves a response. Not every opinion requires correction. Situations, and not every chapter needs to be narrated publicly. There were moments when staying silent felt lonely. Situations when I wished people could see the intention behind my choices instead of assuming the worst. Situations, but I also knew that explaining myself endlessly would pull me back into a cycle I was trying to break. So I stayed focused on what mattered most. My family, situations, my children, my healing. I reminded myself that growth often looks confusing from the outside, that change doesn't always come with clarity right away. Situations. And that being misunderstood doesn't mean being wrong. In time, the noise softened, or maybe I simply learned not to listen as closely. Either way, I felt steadier. Situations, I was no longer living for approval, I was living with intention. And that shift, quiet as it was, marked one of the most important turning points of my life. There came a point when I stopped waiting for closure. For a long time, I believed healing needed a final conversation, and understanding. Situations, a moment where everything would make sense and fall into place. I thought peace would arrive once every question was answered. But that moment never came. Situations, and eventually I realized it didn't have to. Peace didn't come from resolution, it came from acceptance. Situations, I learned to sit with unanswered questions without letting them define me. Situations, and I learned that not every relationship returns to what it once was, and that doesn't mean it failed. Sometimes relationships change shape so they can survive. Situations, I stopped trying to rewrite the past. I stopped wishing things had been different. Instead, situations, I began honoring the truth of my experience without needing it to be validated by everyone else. That was when silence changed for me. It stopped feeling like something I was forced into. It became something I chose. Silence gave me space to listen to my instincts, my needs, my children, situations, and the quieter parts of myself that had been ignored for years. It allowed me to live without constantly explaining who I was becoming. Situation. I found strength in being unseen, not invisible, but private. I could love my family without performing that love publicly. I could hold gratitude without denying pain. I could move forward without announcing every step. That balance didn't come easily, but it came honestly. Looking back, I don't see my journey as walking away from anything. I see it as walking inward, toward clarity, toward wholeness. Situations, toward a version of myself that feels grounded instead of guarded. I am no longer trying to be perfect. I am no longer trying to be silent out of fear. Situations, I am simply choosing to live truthfully. And maybe that's why my story doesn't come with a loud ending. Because some stories aren't meant to be explained. Situations, they're meant to be lived. Silence didn't take my voice away. It helped me find it.